And you are live.
Okay, we are here at House Education, 2 p.m. on February 5th, 2025. Going to get a report from the Commission on the Future of Public Education, current status. Glad it's not me providing it. But I think that what we'll probably hear is kind of what we heard from the state board. In terms of figuring out where to be and what to do and what's going on. But turn over to Megan Roy, the chair of the commission. And we have a document here as well to post to look at. Floor is yours, Megan.
Thanks, Chair Conlon. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Roy, chair of the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. And just want to thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation and hopefully a more regular back and forth update. And we talked about this a little bit when I was with you and House Ways and Means, but we really feel like the ability of the commission to be present and engaged in this work sort of relies on the idea that we have more contact than just delivering a report in a few months. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think what I want to do is give you a summary of the meeting that we just had. That's part of what I think will be helpful, is just bring you up to speed if you are not tuning into those meetings, which you are likely not. And I would just pick up a thread that Chair Conlon shared around the conversation that you all had earlier today and others, is this conversation is ongoing, and the best way for us to serve you well, I think, is to keep that. So we focused our meeting on Monday on two things, and they were both in service of this bigger question, which is how can we be effective in the current context? How can we be effective to you as the body that asked us to do the work? So this has been a challenge. You've heard me say that before, because in some ways the conversation around where do we go, how do we resolve our policy challenges has been happening in multiple places, not just in front of the commission. And in fact, some, a significant amount of the policy development that people are talking about right now has happened outside of the commission. So we began by bringing ourselves back to the policy considerations in Act 183. There's 29 of them. That's not to say that they don't overlap and connect. They certainly do. But Act 183 asks us to make recommendations in 29 areas. I shared the blank, just sort of, it was a way to organize our discussion. It's blank, but I shared it with you just to sort of pull out all of those areas. We realize that it's difficult, if not impossible, to fully address each of those areas without some form of prioritization. I've said to you, we're receptive if the legislature decides to give us that priority or target our work. But absent of that, we need to self-prioritize. So we began our discussion by trying to look at each one of those policy areas and asking ourselves three questions. What information do we need about this area in order to inform our discussion? And where might we get that information? Who needs to be part of the discussion? And then what's the priority level of that item given our current context? We began with the two policy areas that have been talked about as part of the administration's proposal. They are also policy areas identified in the law. So we don't believe we're going outside of our charge to react to those policy areas. And that is to analyze and recommend the most efficient and effective number and location of school buildings, districts, and supervisory unions, and to explore alternative funding models. That's directly from the law. Starting the conversation here generated discussion that I think is important for the committee to be aware of. And I would say we didn't finish the discussion. In fact, we didn't get much further than the summary that I'm about to share, but I do think the summary is important. And then I'll talk about how we intend to keep moving through, and then would welcome questions or dialogue to inform that. So in the interest of trying to summarize what was talked about and not attempt to speak for the commission, we didn't take action. These are not recommendations, but I think the conversations are important for you. Our commission agrees with what has been shared, at least in this committee, which is that we remain not only relevant, but perhaps essential to this process and to inform proposals that the legislature is considering. Those proposals include, but they're not limited to, the administration's proposal. The commission does not agree that it should be disbanded. So that was not a sentiment that came up in the meeting. However, we understand that we need to adjust based on either direction that you give us or our own ability to do the work. But I think that's important because I know I was asked a few different times specifically, do you think the commission should be disbanded? And the commission does not feel that way. They do want to be productive, though. They do want to be useful. There was commentary in our discussion about ensuring the neutrality of the commission. Our task is to generate recommendations, but we're doing this in a context where the administration has generated its own proposal. We think it's important to be able to respond to that so that you have the perspective of the commission. But this is challenging, right? So there is a bit of a loop that exists between the data that we have access to that's largely provided by the administration or the agency, which is connected to the administration's proposal. And so the commission desires to be as neutral as possible in making its recommendations. And we have some thoughts around how to do that. One of which is you all have had a number of really critical experts come in to testify on various elements of this. That is really important to the commission as well as we do our work. I also wanted to share, and I had a chance to listen to the state board testimony earlier today, that and the intention, I think, is that there was a conversation about to what extent does the state board support or not support the concepts in the plan. We did not get to that level in our meeting this week. However, there was a lot that came up that started to touch on a reaction to the plan as opposed to just how will we form a reaction to the plan. We did, though, agree, and I think this is worth sharing, there's general consensus about the magnitude of investigation, modeling, and sort of implication analysis that would be required first to determine whether or not a foundation formula and consolidation changes are viable to support the change needed in Vermont. And then if yes, if they are viable, to determine a transition plan that would prevent disruption to students and educators. In other words, part of our conversation inevitably turned to reacting to the proposal, and the biggest consensus that I could share from that meeting is that it's enormous change. There's a lot that we don't know about it. There's a lot that we want to raise in reaction to it, and that will take time. So, as I said, it was a difficult conversation. It wasn't a difficult conversation, but it was not a very organized conversation that walked us through the priority level for each of those 29 areas. But I still think it was a useful conversation. The second half of our meeting was spent hearing from Afton Partners, who are the communication and engagement consultants that the commission has brought on board. We've indicated this in our preliminary findings. There's a clear need for ongoing engagement with Vermonters, both the ones outlined in Act 183 and also just citizens being able to react to the proposals. And we need support to be able to do that in a way that's flexible. And one of our members talked about the ability to have that level of engagement outside of a committee room, for example, which is limited in the dialogue that you can have, who's available for it, but that would be really important. So Afton Partners introduced themselves, talked a little bit about how they would approach their work. Sometimes those engagement sessions will be really targeted to gather specific reactions and input. Sometimes they'll be broader. There is a link in the materials that you have to the presentation that they shared, in case that's helpful. in terms of next steps, and then I'll pause so that I can answer questions. But some of this I shared the last time I was with you. It really will make sense for us to have more regular and repeated engagement with the legislature. And that is if we continue to be the body that can react to the information. It's required, this is outside of the required report because you're going to inevitably move faster than that report in the current timeline asks us to move. So my goal is to create, if you are willing, a cadence of sort of back and forth with at least this committee and others, and be available to meet with you. Kind of some immediate next steps. You have already, just today, certainly last week, you are viewing testimony that's really important for the commission to have. I am hoping to connect our commission to the most relevant pieces of testimony that you are hearing so that we can be as informed as you. It's also helpful so that if we believe we need to bring any of those folks into our own session, that we can be more targeted and that we're not just repetitively having people say the same thing to a different body. This is a good place, though, to point out that you are rightfully bringing in a number of people to inform your thinking. Even just today, that the reaction you heard from the state board is engaging in this conversation from their perspective, as are the education organizations, as is the commission. And so that's just, I don't have it's not a question. It's kind of just reiterating something that we've talked about that is challenging. There are a lot of different groups of people talking about this, and cohesion between those conversations is really important, and avoiding repetition is really important. And we've talked about that. It is a challenge. So to the extent that we will try to do a better job to inform ourselves, but the pace at which you are gathering information, we're trying to make that match what we can do as a commission. The commission didn't commit to engaging in sort of an overarching question, and actually, Representative Conlon, you were helpful in putting this question out there. Is a shift to a foundation formula a viable idea for Vermont? And if so, what are the implications necessary? Really 10,000-foot question. So we will be inviting Dr. Colby at minimum into a future meeting, perhaps others as well. We have shared testimony, we've shared the agency's testimony with the commission, but we do think it will be helpful for you to hear our reaction, similar to, I don't want to give you the answer as to what the commission thinks about this, but we are committed to reviewing that. Same question for consolidation of school districts. Those are the two policy areas that have been put in front of us. They're already on our list of things, so we don't think that it is a problem to prioritize those in real time. But we won't stop there with those two proposals. We will continue to prioritize the array of policy considerations that has everything to do with the role and function of the agency, the state board. I mean, there's a lot in there, and we'll continue to work towards that. So the next few meetings of the commission will center around those two things that I just shared. The steering group is going to convene to plan those sessions and also to continue to think ahead, prioritize where we're headed. That is the summary. What I would just end with and then take questions is we talked about this before too. Even if it is not a formal change in charge, we would certainly be receptive to your committee saying, could you answer these 2 or 3 questions? Or we would like you to look at this particular area. As I said, we'll direct ourselves, but we would welcome direction so that we can be useful for you.
Thank you very much. A couple pieces of housekeeping. I sent you an email yesterday, I think, to send up to the commission. I just want to make sure you received it.
Yes. I did. I unfortunately received it right after I had sent my initial email to the commission, and I didn't want to bombard them, so I should have told you this, but I was going to take that list and send it to them so that they weren't getting two right in a row.
All right, and we'll continue to provide a summary of what happens in here for the commission. So when we discussed this at the commission Monday, you know, the same struggles that we're struggling with here came up, and so my suggestion was for the commission, perhaps not even necessarily needing to tell us what they think, but more like, here are the serious implications that we want you to be aware of with both funding formula and consolidating districts, or what are the big questions. As I chew on this matter more and more, and I think about the legislative process and the fact that we're already into February, we've been here for a month of 4.5 months, and we're still awaiting details. You know, I'd say it's still unclear what we can accomplish in this half of the biennium, which almost makes me think that in a way the commission needs to put blinders on and stick to its regular programming. And I mean, but which I think it's doing, and I think that taking on these two topics first is definitely going to be very important. But I am thinking that, you know, the timing may still be appropriate timing.
Yeah, I would just react to that too. And part of this is I've been even thinking about this since listening to some testimony today. Yeah, our charge asks us to draft possible legislative language by next December. Actually, we would need to draft it by October because the law wants us to use a more formal public input process. You're looking at draft language now, and so I guess I'm just affirming what you just said, Peter. Is it's still where you may be in the process. I'm not sure where you may be in the process, but it still may be useful for us to continue on that charge. There is always the ability for, you know, whenever you adjourn, for you to adjourn with giving us a different set of directions. But I guess I would just say, if you reach a point, and I hope that I will be here regularly enough so that you'll tell me in real time, but if we can direct our work at any point, we would certainly be willing to do that.
My sense is that I'm looking at your list of policy considerations required in Act 183. And once again, shame on us in reaching too far in our to-do list for other people in off-session work. I am immediately drawn to, well, as you mentioned, the pieces where we have some detail from the administration from the notation of blue, but the row under physical size and footprint, an analysis and a recommendation for the most efficient and effective number and location of school buildings, school districts, supervisory unions, if we even want or need supervisory unions. And then the immediately row below it, the implementation plan for the above recommendations. For me, and maybe we need to have the committee discussion offline and get back to you so this we're not workshopping this live, but that certainly seems like a high priority one in which we're potentially going to get more detail tomorrow from the administration. We have some pretty specific recommendations and research considerations from the VSA last week on this. That feels like an important, and it answers, or it addresses what was clearly identified as a structural challenge in our system.
Yeah,
that's just my hope.
Well, it's sort of that brings home an example of the fine line between giving you all important information from the perspective of the commission and not, on the other hand, repeating it. So as you are getting thoughts and reactions to what folks are saying here, we then could take those the policy suggestions from VSA, and we could react to them as a commission. There's going to be a point at which that is going to feel repetitive. Or you could say that we are a body that has multiple perspectives all sitting on it, and so it's useful. So I don't mean to sound wishy-washy, but that's the thing that we are wrestling with. We don't want to repeat the conversations that you are having unless we can add value to them because of who's sitting around the table.
Their thoughts, folks? One thing that I guess I will need to check out is, I guess it really was this committee that created the commission, but I'm not sure that this committee has sort of the role to tell the commission what to do and what not to do. So I'll dig into that further. In the meantime, we're the most logical given any other option.
Yeah, thank you for that. I intend to send a copy of what you just read to Senate Education just because it feels a natural other committee. I am open to it going where it needs to be. This is only tangentially related because you're right. Unlike most commissions, we don't have a direct committee to report back to. It's just the General Assembly. So, we would take guidance on who that should be. Another thing that we did not really, well, we talked about this a little bit on Monday, but I thought about it, especially as the state board was just talking about rulemaking and the capacity to do that. We are not being asked to generate rules, but we are being asked to generate legislation. We don't technically have access to Ledge Council and some of the things that you do. We will probably need to come back to you and say, we need support in this area. We also talked about this related to, I think if you were to listen both to public comment and to the discussion of our commission, the issue of neutrality of information also applied to the data and modeling that we use. We are grateful to the agency for sharing their information, and there are some who would like that not to just come from the agency. That's still an open question, I'm trying to just summarize. But if we are to decide that we are the body to do the modeling, we would need additional support to do that. Or we could be the body that says, you need to get additional modeling and here's what it should include. So it just, again, likely will come back to someone, and I'll start with you since you've graciously invited me. If we need resources, or maybe there aren't resources and we would just need to state that. We believe modeling of this is really important. And so you need to figure out the mechanism to do it. It might not be us.
Well, yeah, I think that's a great point, because we have both the agency modeling, we have our own joint fiscal office modeling. But maybe the commission is a great resource to say, you missed something. You need to do more modeling here. All right, anything else? Thank you, Megan. I'm glad you didn't have to drive in this morning or afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your
Thank you.
afternoon.
Must be a little frustrating for her, like that the whole landscape has shifted.
Yes.
Like they attacked her with this job, and then suddenly the governor comes out with this.
Well, I almost feel like it needs to be repeated anytime we talk about the commission. It was created before Zoe Saunders was having her vision of where the AOE, what the AOE should be doing. So in a vacuum of leadership there, we did this with good reason.
Yep.
But yes, it shifted below it.
I'm feeling that.
Yeah.
There's such a conflict here, and everything's intertwined, and we have a responsibility. I recognize the frustration, but we have a responsibility to Vermonters to do our job as well. So we're not going to be able to be held back by this conflict that we're all agreeing with. But we're the body who would make recommendations of change to the charge, to the duties.
That's correct.
And I just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we're moving forward with this process, because that may have to be the answer to this conflict, We may not, I value the work that's going on with the commission, but regardless of the administration's proposal, that's not what's putting us in this position. It is Vermonters that are putting us in this position. And I don't see us holding back to wait until we get the full report
Oh, absolutely.
from them. So we may need to make a change to their, I agree with them. I don't think it's valuable for us to disband
Mhm.
them. I think they play a role, but maybe that's something we need to
That we
really
can
think
send them in a
about.
different direction too.
Keep that in the back of your minds as we continue to rust through, say, just if you have thoughts on whether we need to formally change
Yeah.
the charge of the commission by this session.
I'll just say particularly because I had forgotten, I went and looked it up, the language about asking for
I
legislative
did
language.
too, I did.
And I was absolutely shocked that we were asking them to do that, but I agreed and voted for it.
And it's not even a legislative committee.
Right,
To
so I mean, to
legislation.
me, that was the first thing that made me think,
That part,
we really need to make a change there.
let's not forget that. I mean, I don't know if other people agree with that. Usually, like what we did with Aaron and Chris's committee on school construction, that was all legislators.
Yeah.
Fully staffed by our people, and their charge was to come up with legislation.
Yeah.
The commission was not meant to be a legislative committee. In fact, when it left our committee, it didn't have any legislators on it. And therefore not staffed by our leg council, not staffed by JFO. So asking them to come up with legislation is probably in error.
And the timeline is off.
Yeah. And frankly, it could prolong the commission's ability to continue to discuss if we were to put that in charge.
Yeah.